So zombie movies and horror movies are a lost art. From the 30s all the way up to the end of the 80s, we got some of the most awesome movies ever made. But you cannot deny that the genre from the 90s onward has fallen due to a lot of things, such as unwillingness to use practical effects when they are clearly superior, some real grit and passion behind the filmmaking, and also, just put simply, back before the 90s, horror was 10 times more awesome. So today I'm going to give you my top 6 most badass zombie horror movies ever made. But before we get into it, if you want to see more videos like this one, let me know, and if you want to help out the channel, maybe consider subscribing or becoming a patron. Now, I know on this channel I talk about comics all the time, and there's tons of great horror comics and manga that I could recommend. Like one of my last videos I did about Devilman, which is one of the best horror manga ever made. But for this video I'm going to be talking about the best movies that the 60s, 70s and 80s has to offer. So for my number 1 pick, this might seem like a little bit of a cop-out because half of it isn't really a zombie movie. I'm going to have to go with Night of the Creeps.
I got good news and bad news, girls.
What?
The good news is your dates are here.
What's the bad news?
They're dead.
So this is a movie that I didn't see up until recently, but little did I know, it's literally anything you could want out of an 80s horror movie. Now we are going to get onto the real proper gritty gory zombie movies in a second, but I think Night of the Creeps deserves a mention because the movie beats out a lot of the 80s horror movies that people say are great. Now the 80s is up there for my favourite decade of movies and horror, but this decade also has a tendency to give us some really shitty movies that people overrate for some reason, like a lot of the slashers that I don't really love. But Night of the Creeps is one of those movies that I don't really hear many people talking about, but it is one of the best. So basically this movie is about these two college nerds that need to fight off an army of zombies with the help of a badass detective played by the horror legend Tom Atkins. So this movie isn't like the other ones on this list that are these ultra violent R-rated horror movies, and usually that's a massive turn off for me in a horror movie. But Night of the Creeps has so much going for it that it doesn't really matter because you can tell the guy who made this movie really has a love for the genre. For example, many of the characters in the movie have names referencing George A. Romero, David Cronenberg, Sam Raimi. There's also references to kick-ass 80s heavy metal throughout the movie. And to top it off, this isn't just set in the 80s, it also has sequences that are in black and white, harkening back to classic 1950s sci-fi. And this movie has it all: aliens, zombies, badass one-liners, and something that a lot of the crappy 80s horror movies that I was talking about earlier don't have, which is a good story, pacing, and clever dialogue. I know it sounds like a no-brainer, but with some of these shitty movies that people recommend, you don't get that at all. And Tom Atkins from The Fog and Maniac Cop plays a similar character here. And I don't know, the guy in real life must have an interest in hard-boiled detectives, because in Maniac Cop he played this trench coat wearing detective hunting down the killer. And the same goes here, where his character is this old detective who reads Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett novels. And I don't know about you, but that just instantly makes me love this movie. The fact that there's a detective in the movie who reads detective novels and finally gets a chance to kill some zombies. And it ends up with this old detective and these two nerds basically having to save the world and save the girl. There's assholes out there who say that people like me would never be able to handle a movie with a female protagonist. But this movie has a damsel in distress character who also turns out to be a badass. So Night of the Creeps, definitely not the most darkest or goriest movie on this list, but definitely worth your time. Okay, so for the number 2 spot, I'm gonna put a movie that is a really early zombie movie. The Plague of the Zombies is kind of a black sheep in the Hammer horror catalogue. And I could make full videos about all of Hammer's franchises like the Dracula and Frankenstein series. Because to be honest, this company rules and it does stuff that people still talk about to this day. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, for example, you'll hear morons talking about garbage like the brand new Nosferatu remake, talking about the atmosphere and how gothic it is. If you want real gothic horror, just watch Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein for the mastery of gothic horror. Every single Hammer horror movie is a gothic masterpiece. Like the first 3 Dracula movies and the first 2 Frankensteins beat out any modern horror movie that is pretending to be gothic. And The Plague of the Zombies is no exception. Don't be fooled because the movie isn't some famous zombie movie. It is one of the best. And I know there's movies out there like White Zombie, and I think there's some Italian stuff that came before this, but this movie definitely influenced George A. Romero, which we'll get onto later on in the list. But this movie is everything great about a Hammer horror production. You have a small village being terrorized by a voodoo cult of zombies. And just because this movie came out in 1965 doesn't mean it isn't scary, because it definitely is horrific. There's some scenes in this movie which in my opinion beat out Dawn of the Dead. And coincidentally, the zombies look the exact same as Dawn of the Dead. Misty, fog-filled graveyards, some terrifying zombies with some great special effects, makes Plague of the Zombies definitely worthy of a spot on the most kick-ass zombie movies ever made. Okay, so number 3 on this list is a cult classic, and it is loved by many people, but at the same time I don't think it's given the credit it does deserve. Lucio Fulci's Zombie, otherwise known as Zombie Flesh Eaters or Zombie 2, is most worthy of the title Zombie out of all of the movies on this list. Because even though this is a schlocky Italian horror movie, which at first just seems like a movie with terrible acting, pacing and plot, it turns out to be a masterpiece in the zombie horror genre. Because this movie came out in 1979, which is extremely early, and it's really groundbreaking. This is one of the movies on this list which has an extreme amount of gore, which is some of the best ever done. And let me just set the record straight, there's people out there who have forgotten the meaning of a horror movie, and for those people they need to watch Lucio Fulci's Zombie, because horror movies aren't violins screeching, jump scares, pretentious directors, CGI, terrible camera work, and actors that know how to do just one thing, and that's jerk around like a retard. Sorry to break it to you, but that isn't a horror movie. And Zombie is the exact opposite of all of that trash. Creepy atmosphere, great soundtrack, some of the most awesome and metal gore ever done on film. Zombies rising from the grave and eating people in slow motion. A group of survivors having to hold out and blow away an army of zombies. Absolutely terrible acting and gratuitous amounts of nudity. And also, for the people who have forgotten what horror is, those two things are landmarks of the genre. Nobody wants good acting and nobody wants people with their clothes on. We want to see zombies getting beheaded. And this is one of those movies that when it starts off, it doesn't really deliver that until you get to the ending. So if you're watching this movie and think it's just some crappy Italian thing, then watch it until the very end and tell me this isn't a masterpiece. Which in my opinion, this is pretty controversial. I like it more than Dawn of the Dead. Because Dawn of the Dead goes from a great sequel with awesome effects into a drama that goes on for 2 hours straight. Nobody wants to watch that shit. Give me the zombies getting their head blown off. Seriously, this is stuff that laid the groundwork for the Resident Evil video game franchise, which I could also make an entire different video on, because Resident Evil takes so much from George A. Romero and these types of movies to make some of the best video games ever made. So do not be mistaken, even though the plot is terrible and the acting is crappy, Zombie is a masterpiece, and you cannot call yourself a fan of zombie horror if you haven't seen it. And just when you think that zombie movies couldn't get more heavy metal and kick ass, that brings me to number 4, Demons. Now this movie is directed by Lamberto Bava, which I'm pretty sure is the son of the guy who basically pioneered the giallo genre over in Italy, which if you don't know what that is, it's slasher movies before slasher movies, giving us some legendary directors like Dario Argento. And Demons is an Italian horror movie just like Zombie that starts off kind of small, but by the end of it you're in the best movie ever made. The zombies in this are extremely different to any other movie because of the fact that they aren't really zombies and are demons, which I don't really care. I'm still gonna put it on this list because this movie is absolutely insane. So a group of people get invited to a movie theater to watch some crappy horror movie, and you literally cannot make this up, in an Italian horror movie that has no right being this good. All of the scenes in this movie are accompanied by like the best soundtrack ever made. So whilst these people are in this movie theater, a horde of zombie demons break out and start wiping out all these people in the most disgusting and gory ways. All the while Motley Crue is playing in the background. If that doesn't make you want to watch this movie, I don't know what will. And if that's just what Demons was, a bunch of people in a movie theater getting attacked by creepy demons, then the movie would just be okay. But it takes a turn in the second half that turns it into one of my favorite movies ever made. But basically this idiot guy in the movie who is not one bit cool randomly turns into an action hero. Very similar to the ultimate badass Ash Williams, this guy goes from a nobody into a badass you'd see on a comic or manga page. And without spoiling the entire thing, what that means is this guy grabbing a katana, jumping on a motorbike and killing all of these zombies in the movie theater. No, I'm not making this up. This guy is saving the girl, decapitating zombies with the most kick-ass German heavy metal band of all time, except playing in the background. Whoever made this movie is an absolute legend because they understood that heavy metal guitar solos need to be played over 80s horror movies. So in short, watch this goddamn movie. It's one of the most awesome metal things ever made. And for number 5, if Demons was the heavy metal zombie horror movie, then Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead is the punk rock equivalent. And when I say this movie is punk, it really is. It has a great soundtrack by The Damned and The Cramps. It literally breaks all of the rules of any horror movie I've ever watched. This movie is made by Dan O'Bannon, and this guy is such a legend that you'll know him in all aspects of media. If you're a fan of movies, you'll recognize that the dude literally wrote Alien, which in my opinion is one of the best movies ever made. So that alone already makes the guy a genius, but he also worked in the world of comics, literally creating the cyberpunk genre with The Long Tomorrow at Metal Hurlant. Which, as a side note, I'm not the biggest fan of French comics and Metal Hurlant. In my opinion, it's a load of bullshit made by high people. But The Long Tomorrow is an exception where Dan O'Bannon did make something truly great. But with Return of the Living Dead, this guy is fully unleashed because this movie is simply insane. I thought it was a sequel to the Romero zombie movies, but it's not really. It's just set in a world where Night of the Living Dead is based on a true story. And in this world, what caused the zombie outbreak in Night of the Living Dead happens again in the modern day. And I've heard people talking about this movie over the years, and I didn't really think it would be that good. But I got the chance to see this in a movie theater, and it really did pay off. So I don't really love comedy horror movies, but one thing I do like is great horror movies that have comedy elements. Like American Werewolf in London is the opposite of what I'm talking about. That movie is basically a comedy with some horror elements, and in my opinion is overrated. The best werewolf movie of all time is either The Howling or The Wolfman. And Return of the Living Dead has lots of comedy in it, but that's what it is. It's a great horror movie with comedy. Because this movie takes from Night of the Living Dead, Lucio Fulci's Zombie, mixing all different elements to create some of the most original zombies out there, giving us these zombies that sometimes look like the George A. Romero variation and other times are these badass skeletons. But where Return of the Living Dead truly exceeds is in the fact that the entire movie is basically like a comic book. And not in some goofy way that people say where this movie is like a comic book, but in the actual way where this movie does not give a fuck. Instead of having a normal group of people as the lead in the movie, it just has a bunch of punks that don't really have any motive in the movie. So there's not this cliche shit of these summer camp slasher movies, but instead just a bunch of punks getting wiped out. Because punk rock isn't always about politics. Sometimes it's just about sticking up your middle finger and going against the grain. And this movie does that to some extreme extents. For example, the movie lacks a main protagonist that is some badass. Instead, everybody is an idiot who just gets killed. And an even bigger example is the fact that one of the punk rocker chicks in the movie is naked for the entire thing. So I don't know who made this decision making this movie, but in my opinion, it's genius. All that stuff aside, the movie is shot excellently with great rain, atmosphere, and fog, and truly has one of the best settings with all of these skeleton zombies rising out of the grave with thunder and lightning whilst punk rock is playing. It's kind of hard to explain to somebody who doesn't read comics, but the way that Return of the Living Dead actually has balls is the same way that a lot of comics do. And that's my best description of Return of the Living Dead, a zombie horror movie with balls that isn't afraid to have massive amounts of gore, nudity, and just stupid characters. This is my type of movie right here, and if you haven't seen it already, watch it or else. And now for the final spot on this list, it's going to get a little bit controversial and political, even though it shouldn't really have to, and I have a belief that horror movies aren't really about anything. The worst type of pricks on this planet are the type of people who try to tell you that a movie you like is actually about something else. And without going too off topic, that's all this channel is people commenting and getting mad, telling me that some comic or manga is actually about something else. And I have nothing really to say to those people other than go fuck yourself. A horror movie about zombies eating people is about zombies eating people. It's not about leftism or politics. No, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not about the death of the hippie movement, whatever the fuck that means. So with all of that out of the way, the #1 zombie movie of all time that broke all of the rules and is revolutionary to this day is George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Now I was just about to say, what can I say about this movie that hasn't been said already? But there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been said already. Like the fact that George A. Romero stated that he never intended any politics in this story. And to me, that is very clear. This is basically basically one of the best horror movies ever made. And you can watch this movie and not see any allegory or message. And if you do, you're probably an asshole who needs to go back to reading the Communist Manifesto. Because if you can't see that this is basically just one of the most awesome things ever made, then I don't know what's wrong with you. This movie has not only everything a zombie movie should have, but also every single thing a horror movie should have. Badass masculine characters who smoke and shoot zombies, female characters that can be a damsel in distress and sometimes fight back, groundbreaking gore that is shocking to this day, and some of the best visuals ever put to film. Seriously, I adore everything about this movie. It's a movie that a lot of people have probably watched, but if you haven't, save it for October 31st. It has the amazingly shot, dark, contained setting of this house where survivors have to camp out. And not only that, the entire movie is in black and white, which in my opinion is the way horror movies should be. And I don't mean that every single horror movie should be. I love the horror movies that are in color, like the Hammer horror movies that showed us blood and guts, and all of the 80s stuff. But in my opinion, black and white truly gets the point across of what a horror movie is. And that is no better shown than in this, where you see some of the darkest stuff ever shot for its time. Great use of Dutch angles and unorthodox camera work that would go on to inspire the legend Sam Raimi in Evil Dead 1 and 2, which I can make entire videos about because all of those movies are masterpieces. But Night of the Living Dead sees these random people bunched up in a house to have to survive. And spoiler alert, none of it goes well. Every single thing goes wrong, which is something that I admire in a horror movie. There's no happy ending and there's no hero that really comes out on top. George A. Romero breaks all the rules in this movie. Some stuff I probably can't say on YouTube, but this movie has a lot of gore and disturbing stuff, even though it is in black and white. Leaving the blood and guts and terror to your imagination is just genius. That probably wasn't even on purpose, but made this a masterpiece. And I hate how Night of the Living Dead has become some movie that people want to make political, when Romero said it himself that it is not about that at all. And this movie is inspiring every single horror movie to this day. And a lot of people haven't even seen this. And just on my last point about Night of the Living Dead, it's a shame that such an awesome feat in filmmaking and horror is dumbed down to some political ideology that wasn't even in the movie. But ignore all of that bullshit. Night of the Living Dead is easily one of the best horror movies ever made and the best zombie horror movie. So if you're a fan of classic horror or any of these movies, or if I left anything out, do let me know in the comment section below. So if you haven't already, delve into the ultimate rebellion against shitty mainstream movies, the dark punk rock kick-ass world of zombie horror.